Welcome to the Tony Steuer podcast, presented by Paperwork. Be prepared for life.
Welcome. I'm pleased to be joined today by Ilene Slatko. Ilene is the founder and principal of DSS Consulting. Ilene is also a speaker, coach, and consultant. DSS Consulting provides clients with behavioral and financial decision-making strategies. Through seminars, webinars, her Money Masters program, and an online library of financial programs, Ilene takes clients through various aspects of their financial journey. Ilene, welcome to Get Ready.
Thanks, Tony. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. Thanks for joining me. So, let's dive in. This is where I always like to start. Can you tell us, what is your origin story? How did you get started in financial literacy for women?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a little embarrassing, only because I wish I had a pure motive when I started, but the truth is it was a way to dive into my financial business. I was a trained stockbroker originally with a large wirehouse. And back in those days, the process was what we called smile and dial. So we were expected to, make 200 calls a day or what have you and try and find clients. And I thought, oh no, absolutely not. I can't do that. So right about the time I was going into training and trying to pull all this together in terms of how I was going to get business, we had 3 men in my family pass away in a period of 4 months. And so the 3 widows, my mother, my grandmother, and an aunt, all of varying income, all of varying education, but all of them had problems with managing the portfolio and knowing what to do next. And I just saw that this was an opportunity, this was a need waiting to be filled. And so I began to focus my business on working with women and wrote my first program, which was Women and Their Money. And it was so successful. My sales manager never bothered to bug me about getting on the phone and smiling and dialing. So that was, what turned out was that I loved working with the women. I loved seeing their change and empowerment when they realized that they could do whatever, it was that they didn't think they could do. So for instance, I don't know, a year or 2 after I had done my last program, I was out at a shopping center or what have you, and a woman comes up to me and she says, Ilene, I'm sure you don't remember me because I know you had lots of women in your class, but I took your Women and Their Money program and I really had wanted to get into investment real estate and I just didn't know how to do it. She said, but you told me I could do it and you told me the steps to take. And she goes, and I own investment real estate now and it's because of you. So thank you. And, I love that story, not because I'm so great, but because there are very few times in life where I think, at least in my experience, where people come back and say, this is how you have impacted me. And so it's a great story because someone did, they found me and said, thank you, and told me how I impacted them. So anyway, that's how I got started in it.
What, I love that. I think that's so important that, that you're able to make a difference and that you were able to hear that at some point, because we oftentimes don't know if we make a difference.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what motivates me now, and to be, to be very clear with everyone, you and, your listeners. I no longer sell products. So I took myself out of being licensed and registered several years ago when I decided to go full force into just providing training, coaching, and consulting in this. So I didn't ever want to cross the line and have someone say, well, wait, I thought you mentioned that I should be buying, fill in the blank. I'm like, not ever doing that. So, yeah, I love it. And I hope to make a difference.
And you do. I think moving it forward, the discussion about financial literacy, especially the discussion of financial literacy for women, is so important. You mentioned the widows earlier. Uh, I've heard that story so many times about women who become widows, and all of a sudden it's like, what do I do? Financially speaking, of course.
Right. And unfortunately, when I started doing my program was a number of years ago. And I would have hoped that by now the statistics would be different. But in fact, the statistics are still fairly similar to what they were back in the late 80s, which is, women earn way less than men. So there's this huge lifetime earnings gap. Women traditionally rely on partners or parents. If they're single women, they rely on other people to help tell them what to do and direct them. And so while all those years have passed, not much has changed in the landscape of women and financial literacy, which is why that's where my focus is.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're out doing it. And that's what this podcast is about, is hoping to move the financial literacy conversation forward. So as we go into it, can you please share with us about your financial philosophy?
Yeah. So my financial philosophy is somewhat non-financial in its beginnings anyway. I mean, I believe in living what I call a small life, and people always look at me funny when I say that, but that's, living below your means, paying yourself first and exercising, all the rules that we hear all the time, about pay your bills on time, maintain good credit, pay yourself first, all that. But the core of my financial philosophy is commitment to yourself, to knowing what it is you want, and then having the courage to continue to do that, even when it's not so easy to do. I think that what's missing in a lot of conversations is what is it that you want? What are your goals? It's easy for someone to say, well, I want to have money to retire comfortably. Okay, but what does that look like to you? And so my philosophy is, let's get clear on what your goals are. Let's get clear on what your commitment is. Let's get clear on some of the things that stand in the way, what I call your stories. Other people might call, your limiting beliefs. But so the crux of my financial philosophy actually is less money oriented and more mindset oriented.
Well, that's fantastic. I think that's so important, is to be driven by the goals, and that's where the conversation should start, is so much. And you came up through the brokerage house, so the wirehouse is, it's product driven so often rather than people driven.
Oh, absolutely. And I can't speak to the wirehouses now, but certainly back then, it was, you will sell this many bonds, you will sell, this much in the IPO. And you're like, well, I don't have clients that that's good for. And like, well, we don't care.
Very different mentality.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm happy to be on this side of it now. I know we had a conversation, before we went live, and I mentioned to you, I think, just by way of further explaining this, that I'm a coach on a financial literacy app. I do believe in giving back to the community, so I do that, and I'm working with some underserved teens and young adults up in the Boston and greater Boston area. But on the financial literacy app, I had a younger woman ask, she said, puts out a question to the community and says, I have this 401k and, I've got equal buckets and I'm not sure that that's the right thing. So what do you guys think I should do? And right away, people started telling her, well, get rid of the bonds, you're too young, or go all into, this kind of a fund or that kind of a fund. And I said, you're asking the wrong question. You're never going to get at the right answer until you ask the right question. The right question is, what do you want? What's the goal? What's your risk tolerance? You've got lots of time, which is great. But if you're going to get nervous every time the market has a hiccup, you need to take that into account. And so anyway, I believe that it all starts with sort of knowing what you want. And then, like I said before, just being committed to stick with it.
Yeah, well, that's so important, and I love the part about giving back because there's so many people out there that can't afford typical financial consulting or financial planning. So it's nice that there's those opportunities. Plus, for somebody who may just have one or two questions and don't need the full service. So as we talk about assets, one of the things you say, and I love this, is what do you mean by our greatest asset is our mindset about money?
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to ask this, because this really does get at the core of my programs and my, coaching and consulting. We're raised in a family that has its own story about money. And before we even know what money is or how we can use money, before we're old enough to really contextualize and conceptualize it, we hear things at the dinner table like, I can't believe you bought that. We don't have the money in the bank, or I'm really worried about paying the mortgage this month, or, let's go on this fabulous vacation. And, so we're raised with this. We don't even know what it means necessarily, but somewhere in our brain, we have these stories. And so when we get out into the world on our own, these stories, and before that, even as teens walking around the mall and spending on silly things, what have you, but these stories keep replaying in our head. So we get a job and we think, I should really do some this retirement account. I should put money into the 401k. And then we have this little voice in our head that says, money is really hard to manage. I don't know what to do. I'm not good at math. I don't know how to do investing. And then we get all upset about that. We get some emotional thing going with it, right? And then that translates into my action, which is going to be maybe making the wrong choices because I'm afraid, because the mind, the little voice in my head keeps saying, you don't know what you're doing, pick something safe. Money's hard to come by, whatever those stories are, right? So then the result of that mindset, because that's really what it is, those stories are my mindset. So the result of all that and all that talk and all those emotions is that I'm probably going to pick the wrong action. Now I have the wrong results, or the results that I don't really want, which then just compound that little voice in my head, which says, see, you don't know what you're doing. Money's hard to manage. Money's hard to come by. You don't know math. You don't know investing, whatever the story is. And so I believe that we have to start with that mindset. Like, what's holding you back? What are those limiting beliefs? What are those stories? And so one of the things that I always say to people, I won't do it to you, but I tell a story in most of my programs. I start with a story to prove to people that you can actually change the outcome if you change the story. Now,
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Because people do have those stories and those backgrounds. And I think that's also something that can be missed in the financial community, is that people, one, they haven't learned maybe some specific financial lessons, but they also have these preconceived notions about money and what they can do. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about with the widows. And I'd like to go back to a follow-up question with that. What are some specific challenges for women with financial literacy?
I think there are two primary issues, and one is sort of the enculturation, right? We do grow up still, and the statistics support that more than used to be, but still fewer women graduate with degrees in STEM, right? And even fewer go pursue careers in STEM. So that goes back to being a little girl, and I was one of those. I grew up thinking, I am so bad at math, I got to get out of math as soon as possible. And so, embarrassingly, my last math class, I think, was algebra 1, and then geometry. I think that was the order. That was it. That was my last math class. So when I went into the financial field, people were like, wait, what, you don't know anything about math? I'm like, yeah, but put a dollar sign in front of it and I'm okay with that. Translate that. It's those X's and Y's that were driving me crazy. But so some of it is that enculturation where we're raised with that, you're not good at this. You don't know how to do this. And so we sort of wall that off, right? So that's part of it. And then the other thing I think that is more real life, I mean, real life for working women, is this whole gender pay gap.
Mm-hmm.
That I just heard an amazing statistic today. So I've always used this statistic that over a lifetime of working, the average woman loses almost $9,000 compared to the average man. It's just in money that she hasn't earned because she started at a lower rate, at a lower job, whatever the cause is. You know, we're earning 82 cents on the dollar. And so if you get a 10% or a 5% or a 3% raise, whatever it is, you know, or your next job is based on what your previous salary was, you're always going to be behind. Over a lifetime, it's about $900,000. But I just heard today, hold on, let me make sure I got that. In total, women on an average annual basis lose $500 billion a year to the gender pay gap.
Wow.
So it's enormous. And so what that means is that for women, and women live longer, right? On average, we live 5 years longer. So we earn less. We have this voice that says, I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to my money or my investments. And the money has to last longer because we earn less, our Social Security is less. I mean, so all of those things together means that it's extra important for women to be serious and take appropriate risks in investing, which is why financial literacy is so very important for women.
Well, yeah, I can see that. You know, you hear about the statistics and sometimes it just doesn't really sink in. The reality is, and it's so sad that it's still a reality after all these years. People are aware of it, but it doesn't seem to change, unfortunately.
And this year has been so bad for women. You know, women have lost the majority of jobs. You know, women-owned businesses have closed at a much higher rate than male-owned businesses. Women still perform the majority of caregiving, even if they've been one of the primary earners in the family. And now this last year, right, kids are at home. So you know, a lot of women duty, and it's been too much for some women, and so they've had to drop out of the workforce. So it's, that's why.
Yeah, I think that's one of the sad statistics that I've seen is, I don't know if it was last week or 2 weeks ago, but there was 1 week where there were 140,000 jobs lost, and it was almost 100% women.
That was the month of December.
140,000
jobs lost, about 40,000 gained. So there was a net 100,000 jobs lost. All were women.
It's just incredible. It boggles my mind.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So with that said, how do you help women get on the right track? What advice do you have for women?
Take a class, learn about the basics of financial literacy, at least be fluent in the language so that you understand risk and reward. You understand the whys behind, it being so important. You understand the difference between an individual stock and a mutual fund, or an individual bond and a bond fund, and the different kinds of bonds and the different kinds of retirement accounts. And, growing up in the wirehouse industry, right, as a stockbroker, one of the things that the one cardinal rule was you could never guarantee anything. And so I always laugh that there's one exception, right? When I talk about a company match in a 401k or a 403b, whatever, I'm like, that's guaranteed money. That is 100% growth every year. If they're going to match 3% and you don't put 3% in, you've just lost. So at least I would say to women, become fluent in the language. In so many cases, because of what we've discussed, they need extra help. And even women, and I will tell you, it doesn't matter. I've got clients who have plenty of money. They are managing it on their own. They're not sure at all that they're doing the right thing. They would like to continue to manage it themselves, but they need reassurance. They need someone to check it. They need some coaching around it. They need some consulting around it. I've worked with people who are just starting out and they need help budgeting. They need help understanding that a budget is not punitive. A budget helps you find money that you'd like to find that you can put to better use. It's not like being on a restrictive diet, but let's figure out if you say you want this, then let's figure out where in your monthly spending and income we can find money to put aside so that you can accomplish that. So, I would say that as in most areas of life, right, we can all use a support system. And for many people, that comes in the form of taking classes, or having a coach or consultant to help them.
Well, education is truly knowledge is power, right? And,
absolutely. Well, it's interesting. So I say that now, I just used that in one of my quick courses, and I said, everyone says knowledge is power, but the truth is that the behavior change is what's right.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great addition to it.
Because you've seen people in your business, I'm sure, over the years, right, that you explain why this product or this approach is better for them. Why what you're suggesting is what they need to do. And they sit there and they go, great, thanks. Yeah, we're not going to do that. Right. So the knowledge itself has to be coupled with the change in behavior.
That's true. And I think the dieting analogy, I like the dieting analogy because I think when it resonates with people, but I think it's also, that same thing is, you can lose 20 pounds easily in 2 weeks or a month, but it's keeping the weight off is a change in diet habits.
And that goes back to that commitment. So, here's a simple thing that I see younger people do. They'll get a job, their first or second job, and, not necessarily living with a lot of financial resources on a monthly basis. So things are a little tight. And then they get used to living like that, right? And then they get a promotion, and right away, first thing they do is, I'm going to get a bigger apartment, I'm going to buy more stuff. And I'm like, wait, you've already been used to living at a lower level. Like, just put the majority of that money aside. Because if you can put the majority of that money on a monthly basis aside at 25 or 26 or 27, you are so far ahead of the game. And in 10 years or 5 years, you can pull back a little bit. But if you start spending everything that you're earning now, it's a very hard habit to break.
Definitely. Well, and I would say that almost ties back into, I immediately thought of what you were talking about, women in math and STEM, because, to some degree, it's a principle of compounding interest. Like you said, if you start doing it at 25, it all comes back to the education and financial literacy.
Yep. Rule of 72, my favorite quick rule, right? That talks about compounding basically and how quickly you'll double your money. Yeah, absolutely. There's so many parts of this, and the whole goal, as you know, in financial advisory or financial planning, is to figure out how the pieces that work for you fit together, and that's where I think a lot of people have a harder time than figuring it out.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It's at the fringes. Some of the things are relatively maybe easy, maybe not, but it's all those details. So, with all that said, how do you feel we can improve financial literacy?
Well, I absolutely believe it should be taught in schools, so at least that there's the language that people understand. All kids. It should be taught in school at early stages, early age, and then repeated on a regular basis with language and concepts that are appropriate to that new age. So you might start with young kids and actually using, coins, money, and helping them to understand what, the concept of money is. When you're in high school, you're talking about budgeting and using real life examples. Go to the newspaper, go online. What does an apartment cost to rent here? I don't know how you felt when you saw your first paycheck, but I still remember my first paycheck. I was, I was in high school, and I got my first real job. I was working at a store in the mall, and earning, I don't know, got $3 an hour, $4 an hour, whatever it was back then. It was embarrassing, but it was way better than the 50 cents an hour as a babysitter. So I was all in. But I opened up my paycheck, that first paycheck, and I was so excited. I'd worked my 30 hours and I was going to be paid, whatever it was supposed to. And I'm like, okay, I know I had to pay state and local tax, and I know I had to pay federal tax, but what the heck is FICA? Who's taking money out of my paycheck? Well, that's not fair. No one had told me. There was a gaping hole in my knowledge. My mother left one time and she said, Ilene, I need for you to write a check when the repairman comes. He'll want a check. And I'd never seen a checkbook before. When I was probably 15 years old. And so the guy's like, here's your bill and I need a check. And I'm like, I have no idea what to do. Can you show me what
Oh, man.
So, it's so ridiculous. But if your parents don't talk about it in a positive way, and they have a hard time talking about it in a positive way, if their feelings about money are negative, right? Which is why we need it in school.
I would agree 100%. I was just thinking, yeah, I think I was paid that lofty $3 an hour, in high school, and getting those checks, and you're like, where's all that money going?
I know. We didn't talk about families or kids before, but I have a daughter who's 2 kids. My daughter is 26 plus. She lives in New York City. And when she first moved to the city, she was doing some babysitting in addition to her regular job. And so she called me after her first evening of babysitting. And she said, Mommy, you won't believe it. They were gone for 6 hours and they wanted to give me a tip, and they paid for the Uber back and forth. And I got $90. Like, $90 for babysitting. When I started babysitting, it was 25 cents an hour.
Yeah,
It's like I'm making $10 an hour. So,
well, good for her. But it is New York City, so.
But it's so interesting because I remember years ago, a client that I had who, we talked before about like learning the language, right? So I've had conversations with my daughter about cash flow. She said, I don't really understand. I get paid twice a month, but I always seem to have, I never seem to have a lot of money after my first check. And I'm like, well, of course you don't, because the beginning of the month is when you pay your rent. So you have to manage your cash flow. She's like, well, I have the income. I said, yes, but you have to manage your cash flow. That's another part of, right? It's another part of the understanding. I had a client years ago who came to me and said, it was a guy, lawyer, obviously well-educated, smart. And he came to me and he said, I just want you to know I'm very conservative. And I said, great. What does that look like to you? And he goes, I want everything to be 100% safe. Right now, my retirement account is all in CDs. And I said, okay, so you do understand that you're sacrificing in the name of safety, your purchasing power in the future. That's another kind of risk. And he's like, wait, what? And I said, well, you said but actually you're losing money. By the time 30 or 40 years has gone by, you have lost money. That's not safe. It only makes you feel good to open up your statement every month. So, back to the concepts that we have to teach. There are just so many concepts. And there are lots of classes out there, but I think a lot of people don't understand that, and regardless of their education level or the income or assets that they have, unfortunately, people stumble into it. Don't you find?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stumbling going on with personal finances. Is I know the predominance of my career was insurance consulting, and I worked predominantly on behalf of financial planners, and so often a lot of my job was helping people undo their insurance purchases. So that was a big question. Is like, okay, my client has all these life insurance policies. They probably need just one. How do we do this?
Yep.
Making
Yep.
those decisions. So, to close out, this is a question I always love to close with: is what's your number one tip on being financially prepared?
Start with your vision. Start with what it is you want. One of the things I do in one of my courses is I tell people to write down, and this goes back to how our brains work. And sometimes we need to trick our brains, but write down what a day in your life in retirement looks like, but to describe it in present tense. Because there's a really interesting study that came out that talks about how because our society and so many other societies where there are low rates of savings talk in tenses, right? So I did something in the past, or I'm doing something in the future. And for most of us, when we talk about doing something in the future, we're able to not prioritize that. And what this study found was that in cultures where there are no tenses that they use to describe actions, much higher savings rates, because as they think about it, it's happening. So one of the things I say to people is write down what your day, today's Thursday, the 21st of January, and in retirement today, I fill in the blank, and make it as though it were happening today, and then reread it on a regular basis, so that when you're faced with having to make that choice between doing the match or doing less than that, or putting money into a Roth or a regular IRA, or whatever choice it is, you go back and you read what it is I said I wanted. And of course it can always be changed, but it becomes sort of part of how you think of yourself, and it's not just it's in the future.
That's wonderful. I was just thinking about that. Talking about our first job is like when you're 25, somebody who's 40 years old, that feels like that's ancient. I'll never be 40 years old.
Right. I will have everything together by the time I'm 40, and then you go, oh, now I'm 40 and I don't have everything together.
Yeah, exactly. I think as you go on, you go, yeah, probably have less knowledge than I started
Right.
with, or at least when you have teenagers, then you definitely have less knowledge.
Well, certainly in their minds, yes.
Exactly. So, and I'll put this for our listeners and viewers is I'll put links in the show notes. But Ilene, can you tell us where people can learn more about you and the programs offered by DSS Financial?
Yes, absolutely. So the business is DSS Financial. The website is DSS, or excuse me, the business is DSS Consulting. The website is dssfinancial.com. And you can click right on the uh, programs and go to individuals. And I have a basic, I shouldn't say basic, it's a financial literacy program. Some people use it to refresh, some people use it to learn. It's called Breadcrumbs, and it gives you all the information. And then I have a much more extensive, intensive course called The Path that helps you get clear on your mindset, what's holding you back, how to change your behaviors, your beliefs, and put it all together and make it work for you.
That sounds great. And I'll definitely put those in the notes. Ilene, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciated the opportunity to talk with you.
Yeah, and it's been a pleasure. I love learning more about you. So thanks again. And for everybody out there watching and listening, thank you for tuning in. Until next time.